And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and if you thought we didn't get any new cards in the last couple of weeks, you would be wrong. I mean, I don't know exactly when these cards dropped, but they are newish cards. Not really new, they're sort of new. They are the, I guess, reprints of the Street Fighter cards, right? So we got the Street Fighter cards earlier in 2022, and then with all the universes within cards, they are now reprinting them, right? So for those who don't know, these universes within cards are crossover material. It's Street Fighter, Stranger Things, that kind of stuff. And there was a little bit of a uproar, if you will, about, I think The Walking Dead was the original one where people weren't too happy with them printing those cards for various reasons. And Wizards of the Coast said, okay, well, going forward, we're going to reprint these crossover cards, these legendary creatures, of course they are. And then going forward, maybe a few months later, we'll reprint them as sort of actual Magic cards. I mean, they are actual Magic cards, but they're going to reprint them as more traditional Magic cards. And that's what they did with the Street Fighter cards. So we're going to take a look at them here. So starting out with Marika Brutal Gladiator. And of course, this was originally Zangief the Red Cyclone, right? So this is what's going on here. We have the Street Fighter version for anyone who's familiar with the Street Fighter video game. I played that way back when I was a teenager back in the 90s. So Zangief is a character from that game. That's what they're doing here. And then they're reprinting them. So Marika Brutal Gladiator is the reprint. 2 black, red, and a green human warrior, 7/4. That's pretty good. Marika Brutal Gladiator must be blocked if able, as long as it's your turn. Marika has indestructible. Pretty good. Very similar to Zergo, right? Similar stats and that kind of stuff. A little bit of similarity there anyway. Of course, 7 power, very significant in the commander format. Whenever Marika deals damage to a creature, if that creature was dealt excess damage this turn, that creature's controller sacrifices a non-creature, non-land permanent. Pretty good. So we have a little bit of a combination of Zergo and maybe Terolf a little bit. We're doing the excess damage thing. So this is whenever your commander deals damage to a creature, if that creature was dealt excess damage, which is going to be pretty easy because your commander has a 7 power. So they would have to block with a creature that has 7 toughness or greater in order for this not to trigger. And then that creature's controller sacrifices a non-creature, non-land permanent. Pretty good. I actually like the non-creature, non-land part. It probably would be extra good against like an enchantment tribal, artifact tribal deck, because they're going to have a lot of that stuff lying around. Whereas a deck that has only creatures in play is probably not going to be sacrificing anything because you will probably only have creatures and lands. In a way, it can be good because if your opponent only has that 1 enchantment, you can attack them and you're assured that that's what they're going to be sacrificing because it's their only non-creature, non-land permanent, right? Obviously, your commander has to be blocked and it's indestructible. You don't really have to worry about it dying. Pretty darn good. Pretty good commander. Next up, we have Baldin Sentry Herdmaster, which again was originally E Honda Sumo Champion. I actually thought this was a really great commander, and I'm super glad they reprinted it. I might go after this one myself because I've actually thrown E Honda in a couple of decks that I've done. I think one for my deck doctors, I recommended it for one of my patrons' deck doctors, and I also think I threw it in an Underwhelming Commander deck as well. So this is a great reprint here. Baldin Sentry Herdmaster 4, white human warrior, 07. As long as it's your turn, each creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So of course we've seen that before, but this one's a little bit different where on your turn, everything's dealing damage equal to its toughness, but on everyone else's turn, everything goes back to normal, which can be very significant, and especially in the deck building process. The really great ability here, though, is whenever Baldin Sentry Herdmaster attacks up to 100 target creatures, each get +0 + X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. So, of course, you're not going to have more than 100 creatures. That's a flavor thing. I guess it doesn't work as well with Baldin because the 100 fits more with the E Honda, but whatever. Of course, the reprint has to be exactly the same, right? So basically all your creatures are going to get +0 + X until end of turn, which there's a lot of really neat things that you can do there, right? So for example, getting away from the whole attacky thing, obviously with the attacking, it works great, but getting away from that, you can have a, sacrifice a creature, gain life equal to its toughness effect, or something like that, right? You can play into the whole fact that your creatures have a giant toughness, and there's a lot you can build around there, which I really like about it. It's also doing the cards in hand thing, which in white, it's like, oh, well, cards in hand for white. That's very different. I like that. I don't think white has an issue drawing cards in it anymore in the format at all. So I think you're going to be okay there. But I like the fact that you're doing the plus O plus X thing, but it cares about the cards in hand. So that's something else that you actually have to build around. I think it's a really interesting commander. Also a commander that fits in the 99 of a lot of decks. Next up, we have Zethi Arcane Blademaster, which of course originally was Chun-Li Countless Kicks, and this probably I think was the one that people were most interested in when they first got spoiled. I think this is probably the one that people went after. And you know what, why don't we actually check it out here? We'll go to EDH Rec. This is the Universes Within. They actually have it here on EDH Rec, and you have, these are the Stranger Things commanders that have been, you know, reprinted as real Magic cards, whatever you want to call it. And there is, sure enough, Zethi, which would be, I mean, only 48 decks. I think this number will go up now that these cards have been reprinted. And sure enough, that is the most popular one from the Street Fighter series. Not a big surprise there. So Zethi Arcane Blademaster, 1 white and a blue human soldier. 3/3 has multi-kicker, 1 hybrid Azorius mana, right? So you can pay a white or a blue as many times as you would like. That's how multi-kicker works. When Zethi Arcane Blademaster enters the battlefield, exile up to X target instant cards from your graveyard, where X is the number of times Zethi was kicked. Put a kick counter on each of them. Whenever Zethi attacks, copy each exiled card you own with a kick counter on it. You may cast the copies. So the important part here is you're doing that kick counter thing, right? And the reason why that's important is because if your commander dies, those cards that you've exiled with kick counters on them are still exiled with kick counters on them. That's why they do that, right? So if I recast my commander, when it attacks, you're going to copy each card exiled that you own with kick counters on it. So the ones that you have done before are still sitting in exile with kick counters on them. It's looking for those cards. It's not looking for the cards that were currently exiled with your Zethi. It's looking for all cards in exile that have kick counters on them so that you can keep reusing the ones that you've done before. So that's really important. Makes this commander a lot better. Obviously, you want a lot of instants in this deck. And of course, this is just a really powerful ability. There's a lot of different ways you can go with it. Obviously, I will point out here, this is a cast. So you are actually casting them. Interestingly enough, the very next wrong card, wrong commander video, I will be talking about this commander. So the timing here is pretty good. I mean, originally it was going to be, I was talking about Chun-Li, same thing though, right? So there is an interaction there that doesn't work that I will be covering in my next wrong card video, so stay tuned for that. Obviously a really great, really powerful commander, no question. Next up, we got the Howling Abomination. This I think is probably the most powerful one. I think this ability is really good. Of course, originally it was Blanca, Ferocious Fiend, which was also probably the most popular character from the game. You know, when I was playing the Street Fighter game, the arcade, this is the one that people went after mostly because it was probably the easiest to use. You know, you just do that electricity and then nobody can touch you. Anyway, I won't get into that. Getting back to the Howling Abomination, 3 red and a green, Human Beast Warrior, 5/5 with haste. The Howling Abomination has trample as long as you've cast 3 or more spells this turn, which is kind of a weird thing to see in Gruul colors, right? We're doing the storm thing a little bit where you want to cast a whole bunch of spells, but you're doing it in Gruul colors, which you don't really see. I kind of like that. It's a little weird to see it in Gruul colors for sure. The ability that you definitely want to build around here, though, is whenever the Howling Abomination becomes the target of a spell, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn and deals 2 damage to each opponent. So once you see that ability, the first ability makes a little bit more sense, right? Because you're like, oh, I want to be casting a bunch of spells that target my commander, like giant growth type of effects, right? I cast a bunch of giant growth effects targeting my commander. Now I've cast 3 spells in a turn, and my commander gets all these buffs from the spells that I'm targeting it with, and then also gets buffs from itself. So it's going to be gigantic. It's going to get trample. It probably would be fairly easily to one-shot your opponents with this guy. If, you know, you had a lot of stuff in your hand, you would have to be careful with, you know, not emptying your hand all on one shot. Like I say all the time, loading up just to wipe out one opponent isn't a great strategy, because then you're just kind of just left there with an empty hand, and now you're the target because you just killed someone. So you do want to be careful of that. The part that I really like about this commander, though, is it gets +2/+2 until end of turn and deals 2 damage to each opponent. And you have your commander dealing damage to your opponents. So a card like Keen Sense, for example, is a fantastic fit here. That's also a spell. Because it's an aura, right? You can do auras here as well. That is a spell that's going to be targeting your commander, so that's going to work. And with Keen Sense, it is looking at that creature to be dealing damage to opponents. It doesn't have to be combat damage. Of course, the combat damage thing works as well, but just your commander's ability of dealing 2 damage to each opponent is going to draw you a bunch of cards, right? If you have 3 opponents, every time you target your commander with a spell, you're going to be drawing 3 cards. That's a great way to refill your hand, right? So absolute auto include. I think Snake Umbra will also do the same thing. You're a little bit limited there in Gruul colors, but you want to also be looking at that. You also want to be looking at where are the auras or the cards that will be benefiting me from dealing damage to each of my opponents. That's another aspect that you can build around here, other than just I build a sort of a Voltron deck. Next up, Vikia, Scorching Stalwart. I really like the art on this one. And this was originally Ryu World Warrior. Probably the most popular character, not necessarily the one that everyone played the most, but the most popular character from the actual game. Vikia is the reprint of it, 2 and a white human warrior. 2/4 has training, not my favorite mechanic ever. Whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So we have a white commander here, but it's got a red ability, which means it's a Boros commander. 4 and a red and untap. Okay, that's the untap ability if no one's ever seen that before. Discard a card. Vikia Scorching Stalwart deals damage equal to its power to any target. If excess damage was dealt to a creature this way, draw a card. There's a lot going on with this commander. So much that you can build around. I haven't decided if I'm going to actually build a deck with any of these guys yet. This might be one I go after. First of all, you have an untap ability, which means you want to be tapping your commander before you can use it. You can't use this ability unless your commander is tapped. So you either want to attack with it, which of course is going to tap it, and then use the ability, or you're going to want to put some ways in your deck to tap your commander. That's probably what I would do. I wouldn't want to risk actually attacking with my commander. It's only a 2/4, doesn't have any evasion. I know that works with the training ability, but I probably wouldn't build around that at all. I would want a bunch of tappers in this deck so I can tap down my commander to use its ability. You're also discarding, so you're also playing into that theme. So you can do the discard thing as well. You can put madness cards in here. White isn't great with that, but red really is. Red also has a lot of discard support, like Surly Badgestor, stuff like that. I would do that in this deck as well. And then, of course, deals damage equal to its power to any target. That's fantastic. And then the excess damage thing, again, you get the draw card. So there's a whole lot going into that ability. I would definitely build around that ability and be trying to take advantage of it as much as I can. Of course, the training works with increasing your commander's power, but again, I think that's a little bit too risky to be doing a lot. Doing it once in a while is okay. A lot going on this guy. So much. This is an interesting one, I think, for sure. Next up, we got Aisha of Sparks and Smoke, which, again, was originally Ken Burning Brawler, which was essentially the red version of Ryu. They were essentially the exact same character, but just different colors. So Aisha of Sparks and Smoke, 1 red, human warrior, 4/2. By the way, let's pay attention to the creature types here. That is relevant. Most of these are humans. Warrior, really popular creature type in the format, so there might be some support there. You always want to be looking at that. 4/2 with Prowess, which of course means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Pay a hybrid Boros mana. Aisha of Sparks and Smoke gains first strike until end of turn. That's okay. I guess you have a 4/2 commander, so first strike can be important there. Whenever Aisha deals combat damage, you may cast a sorcery spell from your hand with mana value less than or equal to the damage without paying its mana cost. That's pretty good. So, we have the Prowess, which can, of course, bump up your commander's power. If you're just doing a 4/2 here, you can cast a sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to 4, because you're dealing any kind of combat damage here, right? Again, the wording is important here. This is whenever it deals combat damage, doesn't have to be to a player, can be to a creature as well. So probably going to be 4 at the very least anyway. So I would probably shoehorn a lot of sorcery spells that cost 4 in here just to guarantee that I'm not whiffing on my commander's ability. I want to make sure there is a 4 or less, I guess, mana value sorcery in my hand that I am guaranteed going to be able to cast when my commander connects. Now, of course, the really difficult part here is, yes, you can use the prowess to bump up your commander. Yes, you can use that first strike ability to make sure it less of a chance of dying. But for me, I really want to put like a power matrix. Again, I love that card. There's a card that I can use it on my commander. It's going to give the +1/+1, so now your commander's a 5/3, so now you can cast an even bigger sorcery, but the big part is the flying there, right? I want to give my commander evasion. If I'm building this deck, a big part of it is I give my commander evasion. Yes, you can deal combat damage to anything. You can even block with your commander, I suppose, and it's going to be dealing combat damage. But for me, I'm going to err on the side of I want to be swinging. I mean, hitting your opponents for commander damage is always good in a commander game anyway, but that way, if I'm connecting with my opponents, unless they have a no mercy or something, I'm not going to have to worry about losing my commander in combat, which is going to be a really important part of building this deck. And then, you know, you just throw in all your favorite sorcery spells. It doesn't have to be doing anything in particular. It can just be whatever your favorites are. I guess you could probably do the extra combats thing here. I don't know how many sorceries there are that are doing that. Some of them are instants, some of them are sorceries, but you could do that as well. Do a little bit of a repeated Narset strategy here. Not sure if your opponents are going to love it, but it is a way to go with this deck. Next up, we have Tadius, Juniper, Ascendant, which originally was Dulzum Pliable Pacifist, the guy with the stretchy arms and legs, right? So Tadius is 2 white and a green human monk, 1/3 with reach. Tadius has hexproof unless it's attacking. So, of course, hexproof on your commander is fantastic. And what I really like about this is, of course, on your opponent's turn, your commander is not going to be attacking ever. It's only going to be attacking on your turn if it is. So on your opponent's turn, your commander is always going to have hexproof, which is nice. And of course, you can just not ever attack with your commander and it will always have hexproof. All right. But what are the other abilities doing? Whenever a creature you control with reach attacks, untap it, and it can't be blocked by a creature with greater power this combat. So I have to get into this ability a little bit. Of course, your commander has reach, right? So that means it is included in this ability, right? So whenever you attack with your commander, it untaps and it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power this combat. Now, it is important to note that even though you're untapping your commander, it is still attacking. So that means the hexproof is shut off still. It doesn't matter that it's tapped or untapped. That doesn't play into anything at all when a creature is attacking. If you declare a creature as an attacking creature, it remains an attacking creature until it is either removed from combat. There are various ways to do that. Or it is the end of combat where it's no longer an attacking creature. So that ability there, just so everyone knows, is not going to save your commander. It's not going to give it hexproof back because it's still an attacking creature. Really interesting ability. Obviously, you want to do some reach tribal here, which of course we've never really seen before, right? Whenever one or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. I mean, that's the big part, right? You don't need to do any reach tribal. You don't have to do anything with this commander. In fact, this could be a commander that just sits on the battlefield and is essentially a coastal piracy. This is a white-green coastal piracy in the command zone. It's not quite as good as coastal piracy because, again, the wording is important here. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player. So there might be a couple misconceptions here that I will clarify. If I deal damage to a player with 4 creatures, that is one or more. I'm only going to draw 1 card. I'm not going to draw 4. However, each player is different. This is going to trigger on each player. So if I attack all 3 of my opponents with a creature, I am dealing combat damage to that player and I will draw a card. So each player that I deal combat damage to on each combat, I will draw a card. So if you're in a 4-player game, the maximum amount of cards you can draw here is 3. And, you know, you can obviously draw a lot less than that as well. So the wording is important here. You're going to want to build that around that as well. It's likely you're going to want to make it so that you will be attacking with different creatures to different opponents. So the melee mechanic might work here because you want to be doing that a lot, attacking different opponents, you know. So you can play into that a little bit too as well when you're building this commander. Definitely, though, that draw card part is the part that you want to be going after as much as possible. And lastly, we got Emmard, the Storm Cleaver, and I saved this one till last because I think it probably is the most interesting one, and it is also the reprint of Guile Sonic Soldier, which was my favorite. You know, I figured out how to do the Hataku thing. What did he say again? But you're throwing that sonic bolt. I also figured out how to do the flip kick, the wheel kick, which was a great ability to keep your opponents off you. That was my favorite guy when I actually played the Street Fighter game. And the reprint, of course, is Emmard, the Storm Cleaver, 1 blue, red and a white, human soldier 4/4. So again, we're in human soldier tribal here a little bit, you know. you can do that stuff. There's a ton of human and soldier tribal support, so keep that in mind. Whenever Emmard, the Storm Cleaver, enters the battlefield or attacks, put a charge counter on it or remove one from it. When you remove a counter this way, choose one. So already a lot going on there, right? So your commander has an ETB. So we can do a blink thing here a little bit. Whenever it attacks, also, we want to be attacking with it. So, again, you get into the situation where it's a little dangerous to be attacking with your commander all the time. The really interesting part is put a charge counter on it or remove one from it. Now, I will also point out, we're dealing with charge counters here. Charge counters are really, really popular. So you might want to be looking at cards that can do the whole manipulating charge counter thing. You also have to be careful here because removing a charge counter in any other way isn't going to do anything. You have to remove a charge counter this way in order to get these effects. The effects being Emmard deals 4 damage to any target. Always want to be doing that in a commander game, or Emmard gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. So obviously you have to have counters on it in order to remove it. So if you cast your commander and enters the battlefield, you can put a charge counter on it or remove one from it. But of course you can't remove one because you don't have one on there yet. So now you're going to put a charge counter on it. Then when you attack, you're going to remove the charge counter that you already had on there, and you can deal 4 damage, or it gets lifelink indestructible until end of turn, which is going to be important if you don't want it to die in combat, obviously. But then you've removed the counter, so now the next time you attack, or again, you can blink it and ET. So that's why like a Conjurer's Closet would probably be great here, because I can attack with my commander, I remove the counter, get the effect, then on my end step, I blink it, it comes back into play, and I can put a charge counter on it again. But you're definitely going to want, because both of those abilities are great, the build around part is I have to make sure my commander is having charge counters on it all the time. Proliferate obviously works here, right? You can proliferate the counters on your commander, so having proliferate effects is going to be great. Repeatable ones, the stuff that just sits like inexorable tide, right? The stuff that just sits on the battlefield and you can be using it over and over again, constantly proliferating the counters on your commander so that all you have to worry about is removing them. You don't have to worry about putting them on there. Definitely going to want to do that for sure in this deck. So that is it. Just again, these aren't new commanders. I think the original ones, the Street Fighter ones, were spoiled, early last year. So it's been almost a year already. But again, a lot of this stuff flies under the radar. That's why I like to make videos about this. This one, again, I just stumbled across this. I didn't even know this was a thing. Stumbled across it a couple of weeks ago. I don't know when these actually got spoiled. I'm saying this like they got spoiled recently. Maybe it was a while ago. I don't know. They don't advertise this stuff a ton. It is pretty important though, because there is a lot of people out there that don't love the crossover stuff. I don't personally. Again, I'm not going to play a Guile deck or a Blanket deck. I don't really love it, but there is a lot of really interesting commanders here. So these reprints can be really, really important for a lot of commander players, because now maybe you want to go out and make these decks. And again, maybe I will revisit this and actually there is a lot of really interesting ones here, and I might revisit and actually make one of these commanders going forward. We'll see, but definitely some interesting commanders here, no question. So now you guys are aware that they exist and you guys can go after them if you want to. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.